listening to the Plugged In podcast presented by the Institute for Energy Research. To find out more about our work, visit our website at instituteforenergyresearch.org. Welcome back to the Plugged In podcast. I'm your host, Alex Stevens, and I'm joined today by the Director of Policy here at IER, Kenny Stein, and we're here to discuss the American Energy Innovation Act. Last Thursday, Senator Murkowski and Manchin introduced the bill. I guess could you just start by giving an overview of what exactly is in it and just a general overview?
Sure. So it's essentially a compilation of, they count it as provisions from 50 different bills that have already passed through the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee during 2019. They basically, it isn't all the language from all those bills, but the provisions are, sections are copied and pasted from other pieces of legislation, and they've sort of rolled it all up into this 550-page monstrosity of, just goodies for everyone type thing. They say that over 60 senators have sponsored or co-sponsored at least one of these provisions, that sort of thing.
So beyond just the spending and the sort of expansion of bureaucracies that are sort of outlined in the bill in terms of spending on new or sort of organizing new offices and things, one of the things they've identified as being the major problem of the bill is that it expands government's purview from just basic research to promoting and actually deploying technologies.
Right.
Could you just explain why that?
Problem.
Yeah.
Right. That's a big problem with a lot of the way that this government spending on a lot of this. It's always called research. The NIH, the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy has all there's huge amounts of research spending that's done by the federal government. But the problem is that in the energy space, these sort of things and this has been a long-term problem. They go well beyond. It's not just basic research. It's in the National Institute of Health, if they're funding a disease study to track a disease, all right, fine, that makes sense. But when you get to the energy side, if you're talking about trying to funding the creation of, say, a smaller solar panel technology, all right, that's kind of fine, basic research. But once you have discovered there's something called the perovskite materials that they're talking about as the future of solar panels. This is my example that I'm thinking of. But once that material has been discovered and they show, it works, well, then it should be up to the private sector to figure out how to, whether that goes in, rooftop solar panels,
Sure.
or how they want to put that, how big they want to build a facility, how they want to use it. Can you make it in very, very small and use it? But the problem is that the Department of Energy, progressively over the years, the Congress has given them more and more authority to get into development and deployment, is usually the buzzword, of these technologies, which means funding example projects or throwing money at, for example, the famous one is the Kempner carbon capture and storage plant. That was a massive boondoggle. Billions of dollars were thrown at it, but it was because the government was subsidizing this attempt to apply some technology in a way that the market was never going to support. So that is, this is how some of the money that was lost during the Obamacare stimulus, or not Obamacare, the Obama stimulus in 2009, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. It was this same sort of thing. It's just going to throwing money, trying to be almost like a venture capitalist, making the federal government a venture capitalist, which it's singularly poorly designed to do, because the money ends up being distributed at the whim of a bureaucrat. It has nothing to do with whether the business model makes sense, whether it makes sense in that particular area, if the company is even solvent enough to actually carry this through to the finish. Literally, a bureaucrat looks at a piece of paper and says, okay, yeah, give them the money. Let them go off and do that. So we at IER and I personally have been arguing a lot that, all right, fine, if we want to fund basic research, okay, that's fine. That's a reasonable role for government. But applying it, finding a way to put it into the marketplace, government just doesn't do that well. So applying that to this existing bill, that is most of the content of this bill. It's setting up a bunch of new research offices throughout the Department of Energy for vehicles, for wind technology, for solar technology, for battery storage, for geothermal, for nuclear, for hydro, everything. And in each of those sections, it talks about hundreds of millions of dollars for research, development, and deployment, which is the DOE already funds research in all these areas as the the existing system. This is creating a new framework for all these offices to go further out into the marketplace and try and whatever these politically favored technologies are, try and force them onto the market in some way that whatever bureaucrat comes up with.
Fundamental shift of maybe supplying what we would consider to be maybe an underprovided public good in research to getting involved in the marketplace
Right.
in a deployment sense.
Right, because it's when you're funding research, that's not. I mean, I guess you're technically picking winners and losers among the research projects, but you're ultimately just saying, you're funding kind of speculative research. But once you actually have a technology or a study that comes to a conclusion, the application of that is going to vary. I mean, this is actually fracking is a perfect example. Some of the early techniques that eventually evolved into the hydraulic fracturing we have today were funded by the Department of Energy decades ago. But the Department of Energy was funding applications in like coal bed methane, like trying to get methane from coal beds in fracking, and that didn't really make economic sense. But they took some of those techniques and applied them elsewhere, and that's what created the revolution that we have today. But again, the point being is that the federal government didn't identify the wrong use for this technique. So, and that happens in all these different fields. And ultimately, what happens when you've got the federal government involved in deployment is that you end up subsidizing an application or technique or project for years, because the federal money is almost limitless. It just keeps going for years, even as the market moves on. But these old projects stick around, even though they don't make any sense anymore, just because the government money's there.
And then becomes a cycle of throw more money at it because it's not working.
It's like, they just need a few more years. Give them another $1 billion to get them another couple of years, and maybe it'll work 5 years from now. That sort of thing.
Yeah, so this is also sort of reopening then the discussion about the wind PTC and the ITC and electric vehicles, and it also provides an opportunity for the House to sort of inject the environmental lobby, I guess, into it too. I guess you just talk about that element of it as well, and then just when the two bills come to the committee, what that dynamic there.
Yeah, that's the real cause for concern in this bill process. Ultimately, the bill that was publicized by Senators Murkowski and Manchin last year, it's wasteful. It blows a bunch of money, and it massively expands the Department of Energy bureaucracy, and there's a lot of bad things about it. But it's not. Ultimately, it's more just spending more money on research and deployment. All this stuff we've been complaining about. It's just it's wasteful and kind of silly, but it's not necessarily hugely actively harmful. The problem is that because this is now an energy bill, it's a big omnibus energy bill, suddenly everyone wants to tack on their hobby horses. And you mentioned some of them, the electric vehicle tax credit. They're talking about the Kigali amendment on HFCs, which are refrigerants. They're talking about trying to attach that, basically take the treaty language and inject it into U.S. law through the vehicle of this legislation. They're talking about the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which basically is a slush fund to buy more federal land. They're trying to attach all these things to the energy bill, and the problem is that one, you get enough of these amendments on there, then this becomes actually a very harmful bill. Like right now, it's wasteful and stupid, but you attach a bunch of these other things onto it, suddenly you get this is going to be actively harmful to the economy and to the energy industry, the energy system. But even worse, and why I say this is a tactical error as well, is that whatever passes from the Senate, with amendments, without amendments, the House isn't going to pass that bill. They're just not going to. The House Democrats are going to pass their own energy bill that's got all sorts of subsidies and tax credits for special interests and all their Green New Deal stuff that they've been clamoring for, and they'll pass that bill. And what happens when you have two bills that don't agree, that are passed by the House and Senate? They go to what's called a conference committee. In a conference committee, it's a virtual free-for-all. Almost anything can end up in that conference bill that comes out. It's whatever comes out of that conference committee can bear no resemblance to this fairly minor energy research technology bill that Murkowski and Manchin have put together. It's going to be a massive boondoggle of spending and tax credits. It's going to be a mess. And the problem is that we've got this big bill, and it comes back to the Senate for them to vote on, and Senator Murkowski feels like I put so much effort into this. This is my legacy. I have to vote for it, even though it's not what I wanted. There'll be other senators that'll be like, oh well, my little bill that this small technical bill that I had did end up in that final package. I feel like I have to vote for it too, even though I don't like everything else. So it becomes a log rolling exercise that everybody goes along with this monstrosity that only the conference committee members really have control over what goes into that bill. And so you run the risk of passing some really bad law because of a tactical decision by Senator Murkowski that she wanted to pass this little technology bill that just, I don't know, for the heck of it, because her committee chairmanship's almost over and she wants to do something before she loses the chair.
Sure, yeah, and something that you've pointed out is that, it's especially interesting to want to do some sort of like comprehensive energy bill when energy prices are at an all-time low. And
right.
It's not, yeah.
Well, that's what's funny is that the justification that Senator Murkowski and Senator Manchin keep offering is that, oh, well, we haven't done an energy bill in almost 12 years. We need to update our laws. We really need more. We need American energy policy needs to come into the modern day. But things are actually going really well. Yeah. We have record low natural gas prices. We've got cheap gasoline. We're exporting more oil and natural gas than on a net basis than we ever have. So the American energy and frankly renewables are booming too. It's not like renewables are being left out. They're getting plenty of help too. So it's not clear why this is needed right now. In fact, there's no evidence that it's needed. So, and if there are there's some small provisions, parts of the bill that. There's a section on, critical minerals, like the rare earth minerals that the Chinese have a virtual monopoly on. That's reasonable policy. It's something that the federal government would be worth working on. But that should be done as a standalone bill. It shouldn't be wrapped up into this log rolling exercise. That's really what it is. So the parts of this that are timely, that do need to be done, should be done on their own, not held hostage to all these other priorities.
A term that gets thrown around a lot in energy policy is all of the above options, right?
Yeah.
And a general rule of thumb, at least for me, is whenever I hear that, I'm worried. Obviously, this sort of falls into that category.
Right.
I guess, what's your reaction to just, I guess, all of the above policy like that sort of being a signal to be concerned, and then,
Well, the problem is that, yes, all of the above can mean different things to different people. And so this bill is actually a great example of the negative meaning of it, because in this bill, all of the above means subsidies and handouts for all of the above. I mean, everybody gets a pony in this bill. Like, there's research spending for coal, there's research spending for natural gas, there's research spending for hydro, there's research for, there's money for everybody. So that also is all of the above. So that I do sort of agree with you that all of the above, is a slogan that it was originally meant to say that we should be using everything.
Yeah,
everybody
compete.
We shouldn't be favoring one over another. But in this case, it's just spray money at everybody. As long as everybody gets money, then it's okay. And so on this bill, we don't have an actual CBO score on it, but when I went through and totaled up all the appropriations that are on there, I got over $20 billion of appropriations. So it's really just spray money at everybody is the philosophy behind this.
Is there anything about this that we haven't discussed that you think is relevant for the listeners as well?
What's interesting, this is an interesting opportunity for people to learn about sort of the procedural game of the Senate, because what our concern is the bad amendments. Like we said earlier, the bill itself is wasteful and kind of dumb, but it's not the most egregious thing you've ever seen. But there's a lot of very bad amendments that could easily get tacked onto this to make it a really bad bill. And that's where you get into the procedural game where, frankly, Senator McConnell can prevent anything from being tacked onto this bill and just pass a simple bill, the simple legislation that Manchin and Murkowski proposed with no amendments of any kind. But once you open up the amendment process, that's where you get sketchy. And because there has been so little debate and legislation on energy issues, and energy issues are so polarized. That's partly why there's been no debate. You have a lot of pent-up desire by a lot of members of Congress to get their little energy hobby horses passed, even if it has nothing to do with anything, even if it's a issue that is 10 years out of date, that sort of thing. So this is a danger that and this is why omnibus bills just in general are bad, is because you end up piling more and more onto it, and a lot of bad stuff can end up getting dragged across the line into legislation that's very harmful.